Hi everyone, thanks for joining today. I'm Prarthana Bhattacharyya and this is my thesis seminar. My thesis is on perception and prediction in multi-agent urban traffic scenarios for autonomous driving. So just to introduce the thesis a little bit, so as we know, the traditional autonomy stack has inputs in the form of LiDAR, RGB, map, or a combination of these inputs. There's 3D object detection, in which we want to find out the location and orientation of different objects like cars, pedestrians, etc. in the scene. Once we have their locations, orientations, positions, etc., we want to associate them across time. And this is what we call multi-object tracking. Once we have tracks, we then want to find out where they're going to be in a certain future. And this is the problem of multi-agent forecasting. Ultimately, the ego vehicle, which is the autonomous vehicle, can use this to figure out its planning outputs. So the contributions for this thesis, we first look at the problem of multi-object tracking, and we published this in IV19. Then from our observations and our findings in this domain of multi-object tracking, we then explore improving 3D object detection, which we have published in these domains. And once we have the tracks and once we have the improved detections, we focus on actually forecasting the futures. And we have 2 contributions in this area. So first, starting with the problem of multi-object tracking. This is the first problem that we focus on. So the goal of multi-object tracking is to determine, so given like detections of multiple objects in a three-dimensional scene, we want to be able to associate them over time. And we operate in a tracking by detection framework where detections, 3D detections in this case, from an off-the-shelf detector is available. And then we want to associate these detections across the frames and thus build tracks. So what is the problem that we focus on? So my contribution, so I wrote this with a couple of colleagues, and my particular contribution in this particular area of data association. So what is data association, right? So for data association, we want to match new sensor detections to existing tracks at each time step. And essentially, we're looking for an optimal assignment between multiple detections, so multiple measurements, and multiple tracks. So what are the challenges for data association for multi-object tracking? So there's clutter, there is occlusion, there may be misdetections, and there may be false detections. So this may lead to error scenarios like ID switches. So for example, when we are associating across time, the IDs may be flipped, or there may be fragmentation where a track is lost and then started anew. So what are the most popular, what is the most commonly used method for data association? So the most commonly used method, given n tracks and m detections, let's say, we have this sort of a cost matrix or an affinity matrix. So the affinity between, say, a detection and a track. And we want to choose a one-to-one correspondence that actually maximizes the sum of these affinity scores. So the goal is to find the optimal assignment of measurements to tracks so that the total assignment cost is minimized. So we can actually set this up as a 0-1 integer program, and the most famous algorithm for solving this is actually the Hungarian algorithm. So this will help us find the global assignment matrix. So this will be the final assignment. Now, when we started working on this problem, it had just begun, deep neural networks had just begun to solve combinatorial optimization problems. So then the natural question to ask was, can we actually formulate this data association step in a multi-object tracking framework as an end-to-end learning algorithm? So can we, given an affinity matrix, can we learn to predict the assignments directly? So the core idea was just to set up the data association as an inference in a CNN. And the advantage is, of course, that we can learn matchable features for data association end-to-end. So once we have this end-to-end, we can learn the affinity scores, we can learn matchable features, and we can do data association better. So this was the motivation of the problem. The general idea for this was that we have, say we have 4 tracks, and this is frame t minus 1 and this is t. And for simplicity, we'll only consider this track 0. So we construct a local similarity map. So we have similarity scores, and this part was constructed by my colleague. So once we have a local similarity map, we want to get direct assignments, right? So as you can see here, the local similarity map, we see that the most probable measurement has the highest similarity score, given by green here. And this is the correct assignment output by our proposed ASOCNet as well. Now, what is this ASOCNet, right? So ASOCNet performs the actual data association between the tracks and the measurements using the similarity score. So we feed the similarity score here into our CNN. So this is like dilated convolutions. These are some residual connections here, but the idea here is that this is just a CNN. And the outputs are the probability distributions for each track being associated. So we get association maps here. So training a SOCNet can be really considered as a classification problem in which labels are association maps showing the true data association for each existing target or each existing track. Now, we have to talk a little bit about regularization here because, as you can see, like there could be a tendency of just matching it to the nearest available measurement. So while we train this in a classification setup, we also make sure to use regularization in the form of weight decay. Now the performance, this is a scenario with a parked car, with several parked cars, and also there's a lot of clutter here, and we can see that through the ID is remaining the same across the 4 frames. We see that it can perform decently well despite the clutter. So robustness. So we see that, for example, here there's a misdetection, but our tracker can sort of maintain the track. Here there is low illumination condition, and this is important because in the similarity or the affinity score, we actually use visual cues. So our proposed method can actually track through misdetections and low lit conditions. So for some quantitative results, we compare these two in specific because they have the same affinity scores. And in one, we have the Hungarian method, and in the other, we have the ASOCNet, which we have proposed. So the first observation that we make is that our ID switching is far lower on Kitty. This is on Kitty validation split for the tracking case. Fragmentation is lower as well, and tracking accuracy is slightly higher as well. We compare it particularly to this MOT beyond pixels because this is quite popular, is quite high performing, and also uses Hungarian algorithm for data association. Our proposed method actually has 3 times fewer ID switches. And ID switches are actually extremely costly for an autonomous driving system because interrupted or fragmented trajectories can weaken prediction and planning capabilities. So we do quite well on ID switches on the test set of Kitty tracking. So talking about how it has been received since 2019, so it's actually been decently received. Our method also actually received an honorable mention at NEURIP's autonomous driving workshop at one of the 3D tracking challenges. My colleague also implemented it in our Autonomous, which is the autonomous driving platform of our lab. And in 2020, Wang et al. Also sort of expanded the evaluation to include 3D criteria. So previously in the accuracy metrics, they were only considered on 2D detection. So the tracking metrics were mostly focusing on 2D evaluation. But Wang et al. Modified the evaluation criteria to 3D, and it turns out FanTrack actually outperforms an MMMOT method, which also proposes data-driven machine learning-based data association. And we actually, in this 3D evaluation, we actually outperform this as well, which is quite encouraging. So takeaways. So current 3D object tracking do not consider data-driven methods for data association. We present FanTrack. We exploit the power of deep learning to formulate the data association problem as inference in a CNN. FanTrack improves tracking accuracy and enables competitive tracking across challenging scenes. Any questions? Okay, I will move on. So the next problem that we look at is 3D multi-object detection. So these are our contributions in this particular area. And the goal is we want to improve tracking. So one of the key tracking metrics was average MOT accuracy, right? Now we have improved, and this actually comprises of false positives, false negatives, and ID switches. And this is just the average. Now we have improved ID switches in the previous section. But in this part, we realized that in order to actually improve on average MOT accuracy, we can also actually improve on false positives and false negatives. So in this part, we propose to improve the object detector performance. So this essentially comes from our observation that to improve tracking, it also works to improve detections. So our detector is called SATA3D, and what is our motivation for this proposed method? So CNN-like feature extractors for current 3D object detectors actually have several limitations. So number of parameters scale poorly with a receptor field, and learn filters are stationary across all locations. So our core idea here is that global context awareness can produce more powerful features, and this can help in cases where there's missing noisy point cloud data. There's a large imbalance between points in nearby and far objects, which is usually the case. If there is some correlation between orientation of, say, cars in the same lane, and high confidence false positives can actually be eliminated by acquiring context in larger resolutions. And this also comes from the observation that self-attention for 2D vision has been quite effective. So it turns out that there's actually quite a large, when we started looking at this problem, there were actually quite a few number of methods which were looking at attention for 3D object detection. But many of them, for example, were globally static. So in different areas of the point cloud, you only have one particular global vector as context, one global context vector, which we may not want. Some of them are locally adaptive. For locally adaptive, you only have very small regions around which, say, close to a meter or something, around which you have adaptive features for context. There were some globally adaptive methods, but they were just using predefined subsets of points. And there was one method which was attempting sequentially to regions around a point cloud. So we propose, given a modality of, say, we have point clouds here, so we can use data representation of points, voxels, pillars, or even a mixture of, say, points and pillars. And we want to have a globally adaptive representation. So this, of course, is quite expensive. So if we want to gain context globally in a globally adaptive fashion, this is actually quite expensive, which is why this method attends sequentially to small regions. So we propose to attend to salient regions using learned deformations, and this is actually taken. We take inspiration from 2D deformable networks for this. So what is our architecture? So we want to concatenate CNN features and self-attention features, given, say, pillar representations or voxel representations or point-wise feature vectors or a hybrid of that. So we want to sort of incorporate a self-attention module here. And this is the general self-attention module, so you have pairwise feature computations. This is a pillar, voxel, point features. We just, a normal regular self-attention would just compute pairwise features. Now, this is just a qualitative detection performance. So we said that we want to incorporate detection. Does this actually improve the detections? So we see that in this case, there's a parked car here, which is missed. So this is sort of, the red is the ground truth and the green is the prediction. So this parked car is missed by, say, the point pillars method. This car, which is quite far away, is missed without self-detection, without self-attention, but then with self-attention, this is detected. Again, a car which is quite far away, which probably has missing points or noisy points, this is detected by our method as well. And sort of a similar case for this, there is a false detection in without self-attention, a false positive without self-attention, but here with self-attention we sort of we can detect this correctly. And as you may notice that most of these cars are usually parked quite far away, so quite far away from the eco-vehicle. And this sort of makes sense given our motivation, because there may be an imbalance between while learning between the number of points in a car close by and car far apart, and also missing and noisy detections. So essentially, this is just a simple self-attention module that we incorporate, and this is the full self-attention module, which is why we call it FSA. And this is just a vanilla self-attention module, and we expect it to get global context, because that is by nature the formulation of self-attention. And this is good because this is independent. Context is gathered independent of the number of parameters, so we can actually replace parameter-heavy convolutions with self-attention. The problem is that this is quadratic in nature, because we are doing pairwise computations for self-attention. So this actually won't be able to scale to, say, huge point clouds or dense point clouds. So this actually can't just be incorporated into the more difficult benchmarks that we have for 3D object detection. So we propose deformable self-attention. So we sample the key points differentially to cover representative locations, and the number of key points sampled is much lower. So the computation is OMND, which is much smaller than this quadratic computation, which is nice. So here we show validation performance on Kitty. So we see that FSA or DSA, for example, there's an 80% decrease in the number of parameters here, 50% decrease in flops. And we kind of see a similar trend across different 3D object detectors. So FSA or DSA consistently improves performance across different backbones, which is nice. So this is the compute and parameter efficiency. So this blue line that you see is the baseline, and this is the 3D AP, and this is the number of parameters in millions and flops. So as we can see, FSA or DSA shows consistent gains in parameter and computation budget across backbones as well. Robustness to noise, so we add noise uniformly to each bounding box. And this is the baseline, given the number of noise points which are added to each bounding box. This is for a second, so this is called the second 3D object detector. This is the point RCNN, so we explore different object detectors, and we kind of see the same trend across these different backbones, that self-attention augmented modules are more robust to noise than the baselines. Difficulty of detection. So we sort the cars based on the number of points in the ground truth bounding box. So these are different backbones as well. So we want to sort of observe a similar trend. So we sort the cars, so less than 55, 55 to 242, greater than 242. And we sort the cars based on these points in increasing, sort them in increasing order. And then we find that there are less number of points, then self-attention is more influential. So context seems to actually be important for detecting the difficult cases. So SADET 3D has been open sourced and has kind of been well received. This is a paper which has been published recently, which also takes inspiration from our proposed method. And then it also says that, okay, they're also trying to sample points differentiably. And instead of using this quadratic complexity, they propose an external attention module, which has a smaller complexity by carefully sampling key points differentiably. So takeaways. We explore self-attention for context aggregation in 3D object detection. SADET 3D consistently outperforms strong 3D baselines across different backbones. And we propose a variant to exploit deformations to spatially sample key points for relation modeling. Any questions? Okay, I will move on. So Once we actually have the tracks, we actually want to predict the future for these given tracks, and this is where the problem of multi-agent motion forecasting comes in. Um, so this is kind of a contribution in this particular area. And once we have the tracking outputs for visible agents, so let's say that this is the tracking output, we want to actually be able to predict where it's going to be in the future in, say, 3 seconds or 6 seconds or even 8 seconds, right? So we want to know where it's going to be in the future so that the ego vehicle or the self-driving vehicle can actually plan accordingly. So given the tracking outputs for the visible agents, the ground truth future trajectories, and maybe scene information and map information, our goal is to approximate the underlying multimodal distribution, which can generate feasible samples for their future trajectories. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but all that's happening here is to say that there are a lot of methods tackling RNNs and in the following slide, CNNs and graph neural networks as well, which have been proposed to deal with the forecasting problem. So here you see different combinations of attention and convolution and how to incorporate scene context, how to incorporate maps in various forms, whether to use image-based representations or vector-based representations, etc. So there's been a lot of work in this particular area of motion forecasting. But what is the limitation? So in recent years, self-supervised learning has actually become very popular because it can produce transferable, generalized, and robust representations. And this has also been sort of seen in the natural language modeling in GPT, as well as mask-based autoencoders, which has been released by Meta and probably deployed in their systems as well, which has done very well. So this potential, however, has not been explored as far as we know at the time of writing this paper in motion forecasting. So in this study, we reported the first systematic exploration and assessment of incorporating self-supervision into motion forecasting. So this is our proposed architecture. And really the core idea here is, can self-supervised learning in motion forecasting improve accuracy and generalizability without sacrificing inference speed or architectural simplicity? So why would it not sacrifice inference speed or architectural simplicity? The answer is because we can just pre-train this using freely available data without the need for annotations. And once the pre-training is complete, we can just throw away that part. And just during inference, we are actually not adding any parameters or any time for the inference. So what are our proposed pretext tasks? So we have lane masking. So what is lane masking? Lane masking is we mask a part of the lane and we try to reconstruct it using MSE laws. Another is distance to intersection. So we already have in the dataset, in the Argoverse dataset, the intersection points are labeled. So we can actually use these labels and generate pseudo labels in which we compute the distance to the intersection, and then we can actually use that to predict what is the distance to the nearest intersection node while trying to do motion forecasting. Another is very simple to predict maneuver. So right now in motion forecasting, most of the representations just predict position directly. But what if as a pretext task or as a pseudo label, we also asked it to predict a maneuver? And we do unsupervised clustering and we sort of generate different maneuver classes as a pre-training step. And we ask it to predict the maneuver as well. And the other thing is success or failure classification. So this is given a certain prediction. If it is within 2 meters of the ground truth, it is a successful prediction. If it is not, it is a failure. So this is sort of a 0-1 binary classification task that we construct. So the lane masking basically focuses, and the lane masking and the distance to intersection and the property basically focuses on map features. The lane masking focuses on local map structure, distance to intersection focuses on global map structure. The maneuver classification and success failure classification is more map aware agent features. So we are augmenting the agent features with map awareness. And this can work on agent feature similarity and distance to success state. So we assign different pseudo labels from unannotated data for all these problems. So we basically use a pseudo labeling framework. Does this actually improve the predictions? So, for example, this is a baseline prediction, and we see that this is the ground truth prediction, so it was turning right, but the baseline entirely missed this mode. The lane masking task, however, has a success. So we predict six predictions. So the lane masking actually has a correct prediction here. This again is sort of turning left at an intersection, and the baseline completely misjudges how far it travels. But we have a successful forecasting in distance to intersection pretext task. So yeah, these are kind of mostly intersection-based scenarios, and we find that actually incorporating pretext tasks helps with the final motion forecasting performance. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
These are all the pretext tasks by themselves, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Maybe I must have missed it.
What do you mean by themselves?
So I mean, you didn't try to combine the pretext.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So in this work, we don't try to combine the pretext tasks. So we tried to combine different pretext tasks, but we found that it's not actually a very trivial problem. So we left that as a future work for this paper. So these are by themselves. Yeah.
I would suggest that we keep like the questions for the end. So yeah, we wanted to record this.
Right. Okay. So now we measure against sort of state-of-the-art methods. So these are like transformer-based methods, different vector-based methods, CNN-based methods, etc., which are state-of-the-art in the field. And we want to compare minimum final displacement error. So on the y-axis is minimum final displacement error. On the x-axis, we have miss rate, which we want to be low. Model parameters, again, which we want to be low. And inference time, which again, we want to be low. Right? So essentially, we want to be on this lower left corner in all of these three graphs. And we find that for final displacement error, for model parameters, and for inference time, we actually achieve the best trade-off with respect to accuracy, computation, and parameters. So we also have, we design other experiments. So for example, how do we perform on difficult maneuvers, like only turning and lane changing? How does noise affect, how does adding noise to the tracks or the past trajectories affect the final predictions? And we find that our method, which has SSL incorporated, actually does better than the baseline. So this actually leads us to hypothesize that SSL lanes maybe learns richer features as compared to just vanilla supervised learning. So we've also released this open sourced this, and this has received good attention as well. And this is sort of a paper that I just saw recently. It's going to be presented maybe next month at ICCV, and this sort of cites our work and says that sort of they follow our approach to learn more generalized features, so which is good that it's being picked up. So this extension is actually one of my extensions, but in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail. The core idea is that we have proposed pretext tasks for learning difficult motion forecasting at, say, intersections, for turning maneuvers, etc. But what happens for interactions? So, for agent interactions, we usually don't have any labels for interactions. So nobody actually gives that, okay, this agent has been interacting with this agent. So can we construct some pretext tasks to improve forecasting for interaction-heavy scenarios as well? So takeaways, we explored self-supervised learning for motion forecasting by proposing pretext tasks. We improve future prediction in challenging scenes at intersections, and we show better generalization. We improve future prediction performance on interaction-heavy scenes. So I'm just going to summarize this work. So 3D multi-object tracking is the first problem that we started looking at. And we find that this actually improves with end-to-end data-driven training. So what is the way to take this forward? So it is an open question, like what is the best way to integrate tracking and associated uncertainty within the autonomy stack is very much an open question. So it doesn't have to be that first there's detection, then there's tracking, and then there's forecasting, right? So it could be like we could do detection and tracking together, or we could first do forecasting and then detection and then tracking. So this, where it lies in the autonomy stack is not very clear. There are also not many occluded or low-lit scenes, say, for data association in the given data sets. So this may be a case for generative models to improve in terms of what data is available. 3D multi-object detection improves with context-based aggregation. So this field, I think, has really matured over the years. So what is a way forward? I'd say maybe leveraging unlabeled data to improve to out-of-distribution cases would be something good to look at. And self-supervision improves and generalizes motion forecasting performance. And how do we take this forward? An interesting thing might be to investigate more effective metrics for evaluating motion forecasting. So, for example, right now we're only using displacement errors, but it's obvious that even for the same displacement error, there could be one trajectory that is more dangerous than another trajectory. So how do we incorporate this idea of dangerous trajectories, say, for example? So maybe investigate more effective metrics. And also, right now we're directly outputting position as a representation of the future, but there could be some intermediate representations, maybe the best of both worlds for forecasting as well as planning. So maybe more investigation into a good representation, which can be midway between forecasting and planning, would be interesting. And I think this is something that has been being talked about recently with AGI, but exploration of learning pre-trained representation from cross domains. So it doesn't have to be that it's just learning from a particular data set. It can learn from different tasks as well, and then it kind of generalize to the task of autonomous driving. So that's kind of it for me. Thank you for your time, and please feel free to ask any questions.